Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, left behind a chilling warning for empaths. He wrote that there are people walking among us who don't just take your time, your attention, or your kindness. They feed on something far more sacred. They feed on your light, your life force, your energy, your ability to feel deeply, and most of you don't even realize it's happening. These predators don't come dressed as villains. They don't storm into your life with demands. Instead, they appear as the people you'd least suspect, the charming new friend, the broken lover who needs saving, even a parent or sibling who always seems to be in crisis. They don't look dangerous, but that's the trap. While you're busy offering compassion, listening, helping, and healing, they're quietly draining you dry. Jung called them unconscious energy parasites. They survive by attaching themselves to people like you, empaths, because your inner flame burns brighter than most. They know how to mirror your depth, reflect your emotions, and pull you into connections that feel fated, profound, even spiritual. But behind the mask, there's nothing, just emptiness waiting to be filled with your light. And the most terrifying part, the feeding process is invisible. It feels like connection, it feels like intimacy, it feels like love. But every time you leave these people, you notice the same thing. You're exhausted, confused, overwhelmed. You blame yourself. You tell yourself you're too sensitive. You convince yourself that love is supposed to hurt. But Jung's research reveals something different. You're not imagining it. You're being hunted. In this video, we're descending into the shadow realm of Jungian psychology to uncover the hidden mechanics of energy parasitism. How these predators identify you, how they activate your empathy, how they normalize your depletion, and how you can finally break free. Because here's the truth Jung left us with. Empaths aren't broken. They're not weak. They're not cursed. Empaths are forged in fire, crafted in childhood chaos to survive what others couldn't. But unless you learn to protect your light, the very gift that saved you will become the prison that consumes you. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how to transform from prey into sovereign without losing the extraordinary gift that makes you who you are. Carl Jung believed that empaths are not simply born with their gifts. They are forged. And like all things forged, the process begins in fire, in the chaos of childhood. Picture a young child growing up in a household where love is unpredictable. One moment, warmth and affection. The next, silence, anger, or punishment. For most children, home is a place of safety. For the empath, home is a battlefield where survival depends on sensing the smallest shifts in the emotional weather. Jung noticed that in these homes, children develop an almost supernatural radar. A slammed door, a raised eyebrow, a pause in a sentence. Tiny signals that most people would miss become life or death warnings. The child learns to read every flicker of expression, every micro shift in tone, every unspoken tension in the air. Why? Because anticipating danger is the only way to avoid it. If the parent is in a good mood, the child feels safe. If the parent is carrying rage or despair just below the surface, the child tightens, adapts, and does whatever it takes to restore balance. This might mean comforting a parent, keeping siblings calm, or simply disappearing into silence. This is how empathy is born, not as a gift, but as a weapon for survival. The ability to absorb and regulate the emotions of others is what allowed that child to make it through nights filled with tension, unpredictability, and fear. But here's where the tragedy begins. What saved the empath as a child becomes the very thing that traps them as an adult. Because once that child grows up, the hypersensitivity doesn't vanish, it becomes their identity. They walk into adulthood as emotional antennas, still scanning every room, still absorbing every feeling. They feel responsible for the moods of others, for the hidden pain of friends, lovers, and colleagues. It feels natural to give, to comfort, to carry. But what they don't realize is that this very reflex, the instinct to heal, is also what makes them a beacon for energy parasites. Jung saw this again and again in his patients. Empaths would enter relationships convinced they were simply unlucky in love, or cursed with difficult family members, or too soft for the harshness of the world. But Jung argued it wasn't random at all. It was archetypal. Empaths attract those who've lost their inner light because their own flame burns so brightly. Modern neuroscience confirms what Jung observed. Research by Dr. Judith Orloff and others has shown that empaths mirror neurons, the brain cells responsible for empathy, fire more intensely than in the average person. Empaths literally process other people's emotions as if they were their own. The sadness of a stranger, the anger of a coworker, the despair of a lover. It doesn't just register, it enters their body. And while this creates deep connection, Jung realized it also creates deep vulnerability, Because not everyone who comes into your life wants healing, some come to feed, and the empath, trained since childhood to soothe others, rarely recognizes the difference. Think about it. The child who survived by keeping everyone happy grows into the adult who believes their worth comes from being needed. The child who avoided danger by absorbing moods becomes the adult who absorbs everyone's pain. What once saved their life now becomes the reason they are hunted. Jung wrote, "The child who could read every unspoken mood was the child who survived, but the adult who keeps doing this will be consumed." This is why so many empaths find themselves exhausted without knowing why they feel heavy after certain conversations, foggy after certain visits, or depleted after certain relationships. Their gift has become their prison, and until they see the pattern, they'll keep mistaking it for love. So Jung's first revelation was this: empaths are not broken people, they are survivors, but unless they learn to transform their survival reflex into conscious choice, they remain trapped in the same role they played as children, healers for everyone else, but strangers to their own needs. Carl Jung warned that the relationship between an empath and an energy parasite isn't random. It follows a predictable sequence, a cycle of recognition, seduction, extraction, and depletion. Once you understand these stages, you'll never look at certain people in your life the same way again. Let's walk through them one by one. Stage 1. Light recognition. It begins the moment you enter a room. Before a word is spoken, before introductions are made, the energy parasite senses you, not your clothes, not your status, but your light. Jung noted that narcissistic personalities seem to have a sixth sense for people who give more than they take. They scan for subtle cues, the softness in your eyes, the way you hold space for others, the warmth in your tone. They recognize the glow of someone who feels deeply, and they lock on like moths to a flame. You think you've just met someone new. They know they've just found their next source. Now comes the hook. The parasite doesn't barge in with demands. Instead, they disarm you with pain. They share their struggles, their heartbreak, their trauma. They may tell you about a cruel parent, a painful breakup, or the depression that nobody else understands. They speak in a way that mirrors your depth, making you believe you've finally met someone who feels as intensely as you do. But Jung saw through this act. He wrote that energy parasites have mastered the art of becoming who you need them to be. What looks like vulnerability is actually strategy. By showing their wounds first, they activate the part of you that can't resist healing, and suddenly you're hooked. Stage 3. Empathy activation. Once they have your compassion, the feeding begins. It starts small. Late-night conversations about their struggles, long messages about their pain, endless crises that seem to appear out of nowhere. Each one demands your emotional labor. You rush to listen, to comfort, to soothe. You feel special, chosen, even honored to be the one they confide in. And that's the trap. You confuse being needed with being loved. Jung observed this again and again. Empaths mistake the weight of responsibility for the depth of intimacy. They believe that because someone relies on them, the connection must be real. But what's actually happening is systematic extraction. Every tear you wipe, every hour you spend listening, every time you hold their pain, you're giving away pieces of your own light. Stage 4. Depletion normalization. This is where the trap locks shut. The parasite convinces you that the exhaustion you feel is proof of how deep the connection is. They tell you that love means sacrifice, that devotion means carrying their burdens, that your constant overwhelm is a sign of sensitivity, not manipulation, and slowly you begin to believe it. You convince yourself that real love is supposed to hurt, that being drained is what intimacy feels like, that your exhaustion is the price you pay for connection. Jung called this shadow projection reversal. The parasite projects their emptiness onto you, and you accept it as your purpose. They don't just feed on your light, they convince you that giving it away is why you exist. And this is how the cycle continues. Recognition, wounds, activation, depletion, over and over, until the empath can no longer distinguish between true love and emotional vampirism. Jung's words cut straight to the truth. The empath mistakes exhaustion for intimacy, when in truth, it is only extraction. Jung's theories weren't abstract ideas locked away in dusty journals. He saw the same archetypal pattern repeat again and again across every type of relationship. Romantic partners, parents, co-workers, it didn't matter. Once an empath's light was visible, those who had lost their own flame were drawn to it. Let's step into 3 different worlds, romance, family, and work, and see exactly how this feeding cycle plays out. The romantic parasite. Sarah met David at a spiritual retreat. From the very beginning, there was a spark. He seemed deep, sensitive, wounded, in a way that stirred her healer's heart. Within hours, he was sharing stories of childhood trauma, of depression, of feeling like no one ever truly understood him. Sarah felt chosen, special. Finally, here was someone who spoke her language. She believed she had found not just a partner, but a soul connection. But the glow quickly dimmed. Weeks into their relationship, Sarah noticed a pattern. David always seemed to be in crisis. He called during her work hours with long emotional rants. He trauma-dumped for hours late into the night. And whenever Sarah tried to share her own struggles, he either minimized them or twisted the conversation back to his pain. At first, she rationalized it. He'd been through so much, he needed her. That's what love was, wasn't it? Carrying each other's burdens. But slowly, Sarah realized something chilling. She was always empty, and he was always full. Her empathy wasn't healing him, it was feeding him. When she finally set boundaries, David's mask slipped. He accused her of being cold, selfish, not the person he thought she was. The truth was simpler. Sarah had stopped being his supply. Jung would have called this the archetype of the wounded lover, someone who mirrors vulnerability to draw in the empath, but uses it as a strategy for endless extraction. Michael's story was different, but the pattern was the same. Since childhood, his mother had made him responsible for her emotions. If he didn't answer her calls immediately, she accused him of abandoning her. If he tried to set limits, she threatened self-harm. Every holiday, every family dinner, every interaction carried the same weight. Her crises became his responsibility. Michael spent years believing he was a bad son. Why else would he feel so drained after every conversation? Why else would guilt gnaw at him every time he pulled away? But Jung would have recognized this instantly as the devouring mother archetype, a parent who unconsciously feeds on the life force of their child instead of nurturing them. Michael's empathy had been weaponized against him since childhood. Not love, but consumption disguised as love. When Michael learned about energy parasitism, something inside him shifted. He realized his exhaustion wasn't proof of being ungrateful, it was proof of being drained. Setting boundaries felt like betrayal, but in truth, it was survival, the workplace parasite. Then there was Lisa. She worked in a corporate office where deadlines were tight and the pressure was constant. But her biggest stress didn't come from the workload, it came from one colleague. This coworker was always in meltdown. Every meeting became their stage for personal drama. Every project became their crisis. And Lisa, the empath, became their emotional regulator. At first, she believed she was just being kind. But months passed, and she noticed something. While everyone else carried their own workload, she was carrying hers plus theirs, not in tasks, but in emotions. They had turned her into their private therapist, their emotional sponge, and the most insidious part, they framed it as virtue. "You're the only one here who understands me," they'd say. Or, "This place is so cold, you're the only sensitive one." But Jung would have called this projection, unloading their chaos onto others while disguising it as depth. Lisa thought she was supporting a colleague. In truth, she was being fed upon, day after day, meeting after meeting, until she no longer recognized the weight she carried. 3 different worlds, 3 different relationships, 1 identical pattern. The empath's gift, the ability to feel deeply, to hold space, to care, becomes the perfect target for those who have cut themselves off from their own emotional light. And until the empath recognizes the cycle, they will keep mistaking depletion for devotion, exhaustion for intimacy, and consumption for connection. Jung's conclusion was blunt. These dynamics are not coincidence, they are archetypal, they are the shadow's hunger for light. Carl Jung warned that the greatest danger for empaths is not simply being drained in the moment. It's what happens when the cycle repeats over years, even decades. At first, the signs are subtle. You feel tired after certain conversations, foggy after certain visits, overwhelmed in relationships where you're always the caretaker. You tell yourself it's normal. You convince yourself that love is supposed to be hard. You explain away the headaches, the fatigue, the silent resentment. But Jung observed that something much darker begins to take root. The empath doesn't just lose energy, they begin to lose themselves. The slow disappearance of the self. You start by sacrificing your needs here and there. Then you stop expressing your opinions to avoid conflict. Eventually, you silence your own emotions because someone else's always feel bigger, louder, more important. Before long, you don't even know what you feel anymore. Your nervous system is so tuned to others that your own inner voice grows faint, almost inaudible. You mistake other people's storms for your own weather, and little by little your identity dissolves. Jung wrote, "When an empath remains in the feeding cycle, their self is not only suppressed, it is devoured." This is why so many empaths reach breaking points, sudden burnout, unexplained illness, even emotional collapse. Their light has been siphoned for so long that the flame begins to flicker, the trap of normalization. And yet, even here, the empath often doesn't leave. Why? Because the parasite has convinced them that exhaustion equals love, that devotion means depletion, that if they walk away, they are cruel, selfish, or abandoning the person who needs them most. This is what Jung called shadow projection reversal. The parasite's emptiness is projected onto the empath, who then accepts it as their purpose. The empath believes that their very reason for existing is to give until nothing remains. This is the cruelest trick of all, to make the host defend the parasite, the extinction burst. But what happens when the empath finally begins to awaken? When they set boundaries? When they say no? Jung discovered that this is the most dangerous stage of all, because parasites rarely let go quietly. He described what I call the extinction burst of the shadow. When an energy parasite senses they're losing access to your light, they don't fade away, they fight harder. Their tactics escalate. They use guilt. After everything I've been through, you're going to abandon me now. They use shame. I thought you were compassionate. Clearly I was wrong about you. They use fear. If you leave me, you'll regret it. You'll end up alone. They use false urgency. I need you right now more than ever. They use identity attacks. You've changed. You're not who you used to be. You've become cold. For the empath, this feels unbearable. Every wound from childhood, the fear of abandonment, the terror of being unloved, rises to the surface. It feels as if saying no makes you cruel, as if boundaries equal betrayal. But Jung insisted this is the moment of truth. This escalation is not evidence that you're wrong. It's evidence that your boundaries are working. The critical choice. Most empaths, Jung warned, break at this stage. They go back, give in, and return to being drained, not because they want to, but because the parasite has trained them to believe that being consumed is the same as being loved. But for the empath who holds the line, something extraordinary happens. The extinction burst burns itself out. The parasite, unable to feed, either transforms or leaves in search of a new host. And for the first time, the empath tastes sovereignty. Jung's warning was clear. Staying in these cycles will cost you everything. Your health, your joy, even your sense of self. But breaking free, while terrifying, opens the door to transformation. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For the empath, this means facing the shadow of their gift, the compulsion to give endlessly, the addiction to being needed, and choosing to protect their light, even if it means disappointing others. Because here's the truth, your light cannot save someone who refuses to kindle their own flame, and if you continue to let them feed, you'll lose the very gift you were born to carry. Carl Jung never believed the answer for empaths was to harden their hearts or shut down their sensitivity. He saw sensitivity as a gift, but only when it is conscious. The danger comes when empathy is automatic, compulsive, and unconscious. Then it becomes the perfect feeding ground for energy parasites. So how do you protect your light without losing what makes you extraordinary? I call it the LIG-HATE method, inspired by Jung's insights. Each step is designed to help empaths transform from prey into sovereign, without dimming the flame that makes them unique. Listen to energetic signatures. Every human being carries an energetic fingerprint. Jung referred to this as a feeling-toned complex, an emotional resonance that shapes how they affect the people around them. Empaths already sense this, but most dismiss it. Have you ever noticed how you feel energized after spending time with certain people, yet drained and foggy after others? That's not coincidence. That's your body reading energetic signatures. Healthy people leave you feeling clear, inspired, calm. Parasites leave you anxious, heavy, confused. The first step is to trust your body's radar. Start documenting how you feel before, during, and after interactions. If you leave someone's presence consistently depleted, pay attention. That feeling is your first and best warning. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. I awakens. I integrate your shadow. The shadow of the empath isn't cruelty. It's the unconscious need to be needed. Many empaths carry a terror of abandonment, so deep they'd rather be drained than be alone. They believe their worth is measured in service, that love must be earned through sacrifice. Jung insisted that healing begins by making these hidden motives conscious. Ask yourself, Ronta, why get out of rescuing others? Ronta, how does helping people in pain protect me from facing my own? Ronta, what childhood wound am I trying to heal in others, instead of healing in myself? The goal is not to kill your compassion, it's to free it from compulsion. When you own your shadow, it can no longer be used against you. This is where empaths struggle most. Setting boundaries feels selfish, even cruel, but Jung argued that boundaries are a spiritual responsibility. Think about it. Your energy is finite. Every moment you spend carrying someone else's shadow is a moment you can't spend growing your own light. Protecting your energy doesn't make you unkind. It makes you effective. This means learning to say no to emotional labor that depletes you. It means refusing to be the endless caretaker for people who refuse to care for themselves. It means walking away from relationships where reciprocity is absent. As Jung wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Guarding your energy is the act of declaring, I accept that my needs matter too. Honor your authentic nature. Energy parasites are most attracted to empaths who dim their light to make others comfortable. If you downplay your gifts, silence your intuition, or pretend your sensitivity is weakness, you become the perfect host for someone who wants to consume what you're suppressing. Jung's concept of individuation, becoming who you truly are, means refusing to shrink. Stop apologizing for being sensitive. Stop minimizing your depth. Own it. When you honor your authentic nature, you stop attracting those who want to steal it and start attracting those who can match it. Transform trauma into wisdom. Here lies the greatest challenge. Your empathy was forged in childhood chaos. It was born as a survival mechanism, but survival patterns aren't meant to guide an awakened life. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That means accepting that your gift comes from trauma and choosing to evolve it. You no longer have to absorb others' pain to prove your worth. You no longer have to bleed to show compassion. You can feel without drowning. You can care without carrying. You can give without being consumed. This is the alchemy Jung hinted at, turning the pain of your past into conscious wisdom. When you do, your empathy becomes not a burden, but a superpower. The Leligai method is not about shutting people out. It's about learning to shine in a way that cannot be stolen, to protect your essence without hardening your heart, to choose compassion consciously rather than compulsively. Because Jung's ultimate lesson was this: your light is sacred, and it was never meant to be fuel for someone else's darkness. Something extraordinary happens when an empath finally applies Jung's insights. The endless cycle of being drained starts to collapse. The manipulations lose their grip. And for the first time, the empath feels a strange, almost frightening freedom, the power to carry their light without giving it away. But Jung warned, this transformation comes with a cost. The price of awakening. When you begin protecting your energy, the world around you reacts. Parasites, who once thrived on your constant giving, sense the shift immediately. They don't applaud your growth, they attack it. One partner accuses you of being selfish. A family member calls you ungrateful. A friend says you've changed, and not for the better. These accusations sting because they target the deepest wounds empaths carry, the fear of abandonment, of being unloved, of being too much. Jung described this as the price of sovereignty, the willingness to be disliked by those who only loved your compliance, the death of false love. This stage feels like grief. You mourn relationships that once felt essential, only to realize they were built on your depletion. You look back on years of giving and ask, was any of it real? But Jung urged his patients to see this clearly. What you are losing is not love. It is dependency disguised as love. Real love does not require exhaustion. Real love does not feed on another's light. Real love nourishes, restores, and multiplies. When you refuse to be consumed, false connections fall away. And while that feels like loss, it is actually liberation. The awakened empath becomes dangerous. Here is where Jung's insight turns radical. He wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For empaths, becoming who you truly are means no longer being prey. And that makes you dangerous, not in the sense of harming others, but in the sense of threatening every system built on unconscious feeding. The manipulative partner can no longer hook you. The devouring parent can no longer guilt you. The draining co-worker can no longer trap you in their chaos. By refusing to carry what isn't yours, you force others to confront their own shadows. By no longer dimming your light, you reflect their unconsciousness back to them. You become a living mirror, one that many cannot bear to face. And this is why Jung said that the awakened empath is not just free, they are revolutionary. They disrupt dynamics that depend on unconscious sacrifice. They expose the false foundations of relationships. They shine a light so bright that it makes shadows visible. The shift from healer to catalyst. Before awakening, the empath plays the role of healer, absorbing pain, fixing problems, carrying burdens. After awakening, the role changes. You stop healing others by losing yourself. You begin catalyzing their own healing by refusing to be consumed. You don't dim your light for comfort. You burn at full flame. And in that brilliance, you give others two choices: kindle their own fire or walk away. Some will walk, some will rage. But those who stay, They are the ones capable of true intimacy. Relationships built not on extraction, but on reciprocity, the gift of sovereignty. The path is not easy. It requires courage, solitude, and the willingness to disappoint, but the reward is profound. Instead of dozens of draining relationships, you discover a handful of authentic ones. Instead of constant exhaustion, you feel vitality. Instead of being consumed, you shine. Jung's message echoes through it all. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For the empath, this means accepting that your light was never meant to be fuel for others. It was meant to illuminate your own path. This is sovereignty, not isolation, but liberation, not hardness, but clarity, not the end of empathy, but the beginning of conscious compassion. Carl Jung believed growth is a process of becoming conscious. Nowhere is this more true than in the life of the empath. Not all empaths live at the same level. Some remain trapped in unconscious giving for their entire lives. Others climb towards sovereignty. The difference is not in sensitivity, it's in awareness. Let's explore the 3 levels of empath development. Jung identified Level 1, the unconscious empath. This is where most empaths begin. At this stage, you feel everything but understand nothing. You absorb emotions like a sponge without realizing it's happening. Someone walks into the room angry, and suddenly you feel tense. A friend is sad, and you feel the weight of their despair in your own chest. You can't separate where their emotions end and yours begin. The result? Exhaustion, confusion, self-blame. You start believing you're too sensitive or too emotional. You question what's wrong with you, when in truth nothing is wrong. Your gift is simply uncontrolled. Energy parasites thrive on unconscious empaths. They sense the lack of boundaries and move in immediately. The unconscious empath becomes the perfect host, endlessly available, endlessly giving, endlessly drained. At this stage, empathy controls you. You don't control it. You're like a radio picking up every frequency without the ability to tune. The task here is awakening, realizing that what you feel is not always your own, and that being drained is not the same as being loving. Level 2, the conscious empath. Something shifts. You begin to recognize your gift for what it is. Here, you've started to practice boundaries. You notice when you're absorbing other people's emotions. You begin to ask, is this mine or is this theirs? You experiment with saying no. You start protecting your energy in small ways. But this level comes with its own challenge, guilt. Every time you set a boundary, you feel like you're abandoning someone. Every time you walk away from a draining dynamic, shame creeps in. And sometimes, you slip back into old patterns, mistaking sacrifice for love, mistaking neediness for intimacy. Still, progress has been made. You're no longer unconscious. You see the feeding cycle, even if you sometimes fall into it. You're beginning to use empathy intentionally, rather than compulsively. Jung would call this the stage of differentiation. You're learning that your feelings are yours, and others' feelings belong to them. But the shadow still whispers, if you stop giving, you'll be unloved. Level 3. The sovereign empath. This is the destination Jung pointed toward. Few arrive, but those who do change everything. Here, you've integrated your shadow. You no longer need to be needed in order to feel worthy. You understand that your value isn't measured by how much pain you carry for others. You can sit with someone's grief, anger, or despair without absorbing it as your own. You begin to attract conscious relationships, people who don't just take, but give. People who see your depth not as a resource to consume, but as a gift to honor. At this level, your empathy becomes a tool for discernment. You can tell the difference between authentic emotion and performed drama, between intimacy and manipulation, between genuine connection and parasitic feeding. The sovereign empath no longer shines their light recklessly. They shine it consciously, illuminating their own path and allowing others to walk beside them, not consume them. Jung would say this is individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not the savior, not the fixer, not the endless giver, but a whole being, standing in their own light. The courage to disappoint. The journey from unconscious to sovereign requires what Jung called the terrifying acceptance of the self. For empaths, this means learning to disappoint. You must be willing to disappoint the partner who demands endless care. You must be willing to disappoint the family member who uses guilt as a leash. You must be willing to disappoint society's idea of the selfless healer, because only then will you discover the truth. Your light is not a commodity. It is not a resource for others to consume. It is your essence, and when you protect it, it grows stronger. Most empaths live and die in level 1. Some climb to level 2 but never move beyond the guilt. But those who rise to level 3, the sovereign empaths, become dangerous to every unconscious system around them. They no longer feed shadows, they awaken them. Jung's words echo here. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the empath, who you truly are is not prey, it is sovereign. Carl Jung left us with a truth that is both liberating and terrifying. Once an empath awakens to their power, they can never go back. At first, awakening feels like clarity. You begin to notice the patterns that once controlled you. You see how many relationships in your life were not built on love, but on consumption. You recognize how often you confused being needed with being valued, exhaustion with intimacy, and depletion with devotion. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The price of awakening. This is where most empaths hesitate, because awakening doesn't just give you freedom, it demands sacrifice. You will lose relationships. Some people will accuse you of being selfish. Family members may guilt you for changing. Friends may fade when they realize they can no longer feed on your light. Romantic partners who once clung to your compassion may call you cold. Jung called this the price of sovereignty, the willingness to stand alone rather than live as prey. It is painful, it feels like grief, but it is also necessary, because here's the truth: you are not losing love. You are shedding dependency disguised as love. What falls away is not intimacy, it is manipulation. What remains is authenticity. The danger of misstep. But Jung's warning didn't end there. He saw that many empaths, once awakened, fall into a trap. They mistake walls for boundaries. They confuse emotional unavailability with strength. They grow cynical about connection, believing no one can be trusted. This is not sovereignty, this is fear wearing armor, and it leads not to freedom, but to isolation. Jung urged his patience. The goal is not to stop caring, it is to care consciously, to give without bleeding, to love without losing yourself, to remain open but never unguarded. The role of the awakened empath. When you reach this stage, something revolutionary happens. You stop being prey, and you start becoming a mirror. By refusing to be consumed, you reflect back the emptiness of those who try to feed on you. By standing in your light, you expose the shadows around you. By carrying your empathy consciously, you force others to confront their own unconsciousness. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The awakened empath does exactly that. They no longer serve as a source to be drained. They become a catalyst, showing others how to kindle their own flame instead of stealing someone else's. The irreversible shift. And here is Jung's final warning. Once you awaken, you can never return to unconscious empathy. Once you see the feeding patterns, you can't unsee them. Once you feel the strength of sovereignty, you can't tolerate depletion again. Once you taste freedom, you can't return to emotional slavery. This knowledge will cost you. It will strip away illusions. It will end relationships. It will force you to confront the parts of yourself that once believed being useful was the only way to be loved. But it will also give you everything. Your vitality, your clarity, your authenticity, your soul. The call to action. If you've recognized yourself in these words, if you've ever felt drained, exploited, or consumed, know this: you are not broken, you are not weak, you are not cursed, you are an empath, and your light is sacred. Jung's warning was clear: they're feeding on your light, but his promise was even clearer: you have the power to stop them. So guard your energy, honor your nature, stand in your sovereignty, and never again mistake being drained for being loved. If this message resonated with you, don't keep it in the shadows. Like this video to affirm your light, share it with others who may be unknowingly consumed, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel so you can continue your journey into Jung's hidden psychology and never again walk blindly in the dark, because your awakening has already begun, and the world needs your light.